Hi everyone. This video is to help you understand how to make a simple rendering using V-Ray in Rhino. We won't be covering anything new. There's nothing in this video that hasn't been covered in the lab. However, in the lab sometimes it might be difficult to hear, or it might be difficult to see some of the settings that we are using on the projector. So this should make things a bit clearer and is intended to help you go through setting up a basic rendering step by step. I have a very simple scene here, and this geometry I made very quickly. You'll probably want something more diverse for the scenes that you're doing for your assignments. However, this geometry should help us preview material settings, and we'll do that in a different video. The geometry that I'm using is really inspired by several sculptures, a series by Jeff Koons, the artist Jeff Koons, called Balloon Dogs, and the geometry here is really good at pulling in the scene, or we could call this pulling the scene into the object. So the object itself is very straightforward. However, the highly polished steel of the sculpture really pulls in the lighting and the environment onto the object. So some additional views. So apart from the color of the objects, it's really the environment that gives them their power, and the perception of the object can radically change depending on where it's placed. So here in the gallery, we get some of the other sculptures, probably the photographer here, and the ceiling of the gallery. And it's a dramatically different effect once that's created when the object is placed outside. We see the sun setting here in the background. We get a hint of the landscape. Here in another gallery setting, two reflective objects also can set up an interesting relationship between them. And there are other sculptures by Jeff Koons, particularly his flower series, which show other qualities which are important for curvilinear geometry. These forms pick up highlights very, very easily. In this series, you can see that, find one where we're really zooming in. Here. So you can see that the object also really reflects its parts. So you have parts reflecting other parts, and then you also have the environment. So the geometry that I have in the scene is really intended to allow us to understand how V-Ray can get us to these sorts of effects. Another sculpture which you may be more familiar with is the Cloud Gate sculpture, affectionately known as the Bean in Chicago by the artist Anish Kapoor. And here you can see that the sculpture itself is a very monolithic object, but the curvature is designed to really pull the scene onto the object. And so the perception of the object really changes depending on the time of day, the orientation. And I'll do a second tutorial, or hope to do a second tutorial, that really shows how we can use environment mapping to get these sorts of effects in V-Ray. So here is our scene, and if I hit render, we just have we just get a default Rhino rendering, and we can see that the image is legible, but it's not much better than the screen shading preview. So we're going to use V-Ray to fix this. The other thing we can notice is the proportion of this image is very different from the proportion of the screen. The screen has a wide format, and this image has a very different aspect ratio. So the first thing we're going to want to do when rendering is to actually set up a safe frame so that we know what we are going to get once we hit render, so we can frame our objects. So on the rendering tab up here, we can go to show safe frame, select that, and now you can see that we have a series of lines in here. We really only care about the outer boundary, and these other lines are intended for video production. We're not going to be doing that. So we're going to go back to the Render tab and to Safe Frame Settings, where we can unclick Action Area and Title Area, hit OK, and now we just have the area that we are going to see in our rendering. So this gives us the security that when we hit render, we're going to see what we see in the window, in the safe frame. All right. So the next thing we need to do is actually set our rendering engine to V-Ray. And if we go back to the rendering tab, we can go down almost to the bottom to current renderer, and we can set this to V-Ray for Rhino. So now when I hit render, pull up the frame, you can see that it's taking quite a bit longer, and the quality of the image is already quite a bit better. And however, it's not necessarily a great image, but you can tell that we have more subtle shading. This is actually called occlusion, where there's a bit of shading where objects meet. And so it's already a better rendering, but we're really going to look now at how we can use a sunlight system to make an even better rendering. So before I do that, I want to change the aspect ratio of my image. And so I'm going to go back to render and go to the bottom render properties. And now I'm going to set the width and height, and I'm just going to set a slightly different proportion. And I'm not going to make the resolution incredibly high, because I want these renderings to go very, very quickly. So, but I do want to make it more of a widescreen proportion, so I'm going to set this to, I'll keep 640, and I'll drop it down to 320, hit OK. And now you can see that I have a much different proportion to my safe frame, and when I hit render, it's showing the same proportions as before. So this tells me that I now need to go up into the V-Ray options. So there will be a V-Ray menu bar up here, and we can go to options. And now we have the V-Ray option editor open, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time in here looking at different settings. But the first thing that we need to do is go to output. So we just click on the output tab here, and right now it's set to override the viewport. And if I unclick this, it's going to link up to what we have set in the Rhino render properties. If I close this and now hit render, grab the V-Ray frame buffer, and now we can see that I have an image that corresponds to what's in the safe frame. So it's a little bit small, so I'm just going to go back to render properties. I'm going to tweak this a little bit. So I will bump it up to 800, and I'll bump the height up to 500. And now you can see that I have a slightly widescreen aspect ratio, but the resolution's a bit higher. I think it'll be easier for everyone to see what's happening with these renderings. So now it looks like I have a number of eggs. stacked up into a funding gateway, and the rendering is okay, but there's not a lot of detail, and the lighting is incredibly flat. So the best way to fix this will be to add a sunlight system. And to add a sunlight system, I just need to, in the Rhino rendering, in the Rhino command line, type sunlight. And this panel should pop up. It's the sun angle calculator. And by default, it's set to manual control. If I unclick this, then I can scroll down, and there's a very intuitive set of options that allow me to set the location and the time of year and the time of day. If your IP address is correct, if you click here at the very bottom of this window, it will zoom you to your location. I am, of course, in Columbus now, and I can also, if I scroll up, hit the Now button, and that is going to set the month and the time of day, the month, day, month, and the date and the time of day. And it is 7 in the evening, so the sun is going to be very low. I'm just going to pull this over to late May. We will all be enjoying summer, and I will choose a different time of day, so I'm going to go to 4 in the afternoon. This is a very intuitive way to set different lighting effects, and I'm going to hit OK, having said all of that, and up here it's asking me for a position for the sun, and since this is infinitely far away, or that's the presumption, it doesn't really matter where I put this object. And I can put it under something, excuse me, it's not actually going to change whether the sun is visible or not. This icon just represents that there is a sun in the scene, and the angle of it will change as you go, if you go back into the sunlight tab, or if you go to the properties and change the time of day, the month of year. However, the sun itself will not move, and as long as we don't delete it, it's just an icon in our scene that allows us to select it. And you can see that I am using these axis handles to move around the sun, and that is simply the gumball. If you haven't used the gumball, there's a button at the bottom of the Rhino window that says gumball, and that turns on the gumball. And that allows us to very easily move objects around in the scene, rotate them. I'm just going to undo here and put that back. We can also, by holding down on the Alt key, move an object out and copy it. So that makes it very easy to duplicate objects on the fly. So I can hold, by holding down on the Alt key, just keep moving the axis handles around, and that's going to create new objects on the fly. And so that's exactly how I made this simple little scene, just by starting with one sphere that I scaled with the gumball, and then I just kept using the Alt key and copying new versions of that sphere out into the scene, rotating them around to make this little gateway composition. So now that we have the sunlight in the scene, we might see something different once we hit render. So I'm just going to quickly render it. And the first thing that we notice is that the scene is incredibly washed out. So originally we were actually getting some detail on these objects. Now they're just white. So we have the environment and then just a little silhouette of the objects, but they're completely blown out by the intensity of the sun. So we're going to go back into the V-Ray options and fix that by I close the Output tab, by going to the Camera tab. And in the Camera tab, I'm going to go down and turn on the physical camera. And you can see here that there are a number of settings. We're not going to worry about those just yet. Let me just sort of move that to the side and hit the render button. And now you can see that turning on the physical camera has made the objects legible again. They have sort of a yellowish hue, and that's coming from the color of the sun. But we are going to change some settings that also alter the way that coloration happens. So going back into the camera setting, that image was still a little washed out. The best way to fix it is to change some of the camera settings. So there are a couple of things that we can do here. Although you are all photographers on your iPhones, unless you use a really nice digital SLR camera or even a nice old camera that shoots on film, you're probably not going to know a lot about these settings, but we can really, these mimic how much light is let into the camera by controlling different aspects of the camera. One thing would be the shutter speed, so how long the camera is open. The next would be the film speed, so this is really changing the way the exposure worked on traditional film media. And so just to show how this works, 100 speed film was really designed for a bright sunny day, and so it's going to have ample exposure with a shutter speed of 200. We could make a slightly lower film speed, like we could put in a film speed of 50, and come down, hit render, and now you can see that the scene is quite a bit darker and not so overexposed. So that's one way that we could actually use the physical camera to control the way that the lighting is happening in the scene. The next thing I'm going to do here is go to I'm going to set it back to 100, the film speed, and then I'm going to lower the shutter speed to 100. So actually I'm going to raise it to, I'll raise it to 400 because that would be a faster shutter speed, and if the shutter speed is faster, it means that less light is coming into the camera, and this should in fact give us a similar effect. So if I hit render, now you can see that very little has changed. It looks almost identical to the last image, but if I go back and set the shutter speed to 200 and we go back to the original settings that we had, shutter speed 200, film speed 100, you can see the difference. It was much too bright, very overexposed. So, so by changing the physical camera, there are multiple ways that you can influence how the image is shown. So I'm just going to change this shutter speed back to 400 for now, and I'm going to hit render again, and now you can see where we are. So this image is still quite dull. Also, it's much too yellow. Even though the sun has a yellow tint, things are not yellow outside when we walk outside. So we have to go back into the settings and change a few more things to correct this image. And so going back to the V-Ray options, we need to link the sun to the environment tab settings of V-Ray. And before I do that, I'm just going to go and select the sun. I'm going to pull out the properties window so you can see that there is a light button here. So if I select the sun and select light, you can see that there's a place where I could actually go back and modify the sun. So it's an easy way to get back to that command panel for modifying the sun. There are also some things which should be pretty straightforward, like the intensity of the sun. If we didn't want to go through the process of changing the shutter speed or the film speed of the camera, we could actually just lower the intensity of the camera. as another way of reducing the brightness in the scene. And there's some other settings which I'll talk about a little bit later. And if I go then to the object and then click details on the object, you can see that the object has an ID, and it's this very long, unique alphanumeric character which Rhino assigns to all geometry and elements in the scene. And you don't really need to be aware of what this number is. However, when we set the sun to when we map it to the environment, we are going to use this ID number to select the proper sun. And again, this is just to explain where this crazy number comes from in the V-Ray settings. So I'm going to close this object description, from which I got to just by clicking details, and you can do this for any element in your Rhino scene and sometimes get helpful information about the object. But to change the quality of the rendering, so if I go back to the frame buffer, this is what we're seeing now. So it's too yellow, too flat, and we're going to correct that by going into the options, the V-Ray options, and we're going to link the sun to the environment settings that V-Ray gives us. So if I click on the environment tab, there are two settings here that I'm concerned with. One is the GI skylight, and so GI stands for global illumination, and that's the engine that's really casting the majority of light into the scene, and we want to, that's coming from now the sunlight system that we put into the scene earlier, and now we want to link that sunlight, or this global illumination system, to the sun. So I guess actually it's not linked yet. It's using some general settings now, and now we're going to link it more specifically to the sun. And we do that by selecting this lowercase m, which stands for map, and we're going to click on that, pull this up, and we get the V-Ray texture editor. Right now we have nothing in this mapping slot. It says none in this drop-down, and we are going to scroll down in this drop-down and select sky. It actually is, sky is preceded by TEX, which I assume is for texture, but we are going to select text sky, and under default sky options, sun is listed as none. So we're going to go to the drop-down, and you can see that there are two options. One is the Rhino document sun, which we don't want, and then the second is this crazy alphanumeric character, which is just the unique identifier that Rhino gave that sun object, which typically we don't see this character, but everything in a Rhino scene has it as a way of keeping, this is the way that the program keeps things straight. So we're just going to select this object and hit OK. And I'll just go ahead and render this so we can see what happens. And now you can see that the rendering turns to a bluish hue, which is what we might expect on a bright sunny day. So the sun has a yellowish color, and we might be able to see that if we had a very high resolution image. You could probably change the tint of the sun and see the difference between a yellow tinted sun and a sun that was tinted some strange color. But now, as happens more often than not in the environment that we understand, we get the color of the sky being factored into the way that the scene is rendered. And so, but we still don't actually see the environment in the background, which could, in some cases, not be that important. But if we want to see it, we just need to go back to the Environment tab here and go to the Reflection Refraction tab, which is actually important because this the background that we're seeing in the scene will also influence what reflective materials actually show. So right now we don't have any reflective materials in the scene. It doesn't matter, but in a later tutorial I'll just set up a simple reflective material, and then it's going to matter quite a lot what our background is. So to set the background to the default sky, or the sun and sky system that we put in, we need to click on this mapping tab, and here we're going to again go down to sky, and we're going to set this, the sun to the that crazy long alphanumeric character. Hit OK, and we'll just close this for now. Now we're actually getting something in the background. And so as I scroll around and render this scene, you can see that we now start to see the effect of the background, and it looks quite a bit better than the Rhino rendering that we started with. So this is pretty much the basic V-Ray, the basic steps that you need to get to a V-Ray rendering. This tutorial is almost at the 30-minute mark, so I think that I will cover background and sky settings in a second tutorial. The only thing I might add is that it's really important that you check your camera settings and be aware how changing the settings of the camera can really change your image and the perception of the sky. So I'm going to lower the shutter speed from 400 to 250 and render this scene again. And now you can see that the sky looks much bluer. Obviously we're getting too much light onto this side of the object. If we were looking at the object from the dark side, from the side that is not receiving the direct rays of the sun, it might actually be okay. So we get some areas which are really highlighted and other areas that are deeper in shadow. And so by playing with the settings, we could probably get a fairly decent image from this. But I will actually show you in the next video some more options for setting up the sky, and we'll also look at materials.